A warship that costs $10 to $12 billion. Not for a fleet, not for a whole military branch. For one ship, one floating machine, one target, and according to reports, that is exactly the price range experts are now attaching to Trump's newly announced Golden Fleet battleship plan. But here's the twist. A $10 to $12 billion warship already exists in spirit, because the only class of ship that regularly lives in that kind of money is the American supercarrier, the Gerald R. Ford class. The lead ship alone had a final procurement cost of about $13.3 billion. So today, we're going to do two things. First, we're going inside the world's most expensive Warship Reality, the supercarrier benchmark. Then we're going to talk about why trying to build a brand new battleship program at near carrier prices times 20 to 25 ships is the kind of idea that sounds powerful on a MON stage and can turn into a budget black hole in real life. And trust me, the craziest part isn't the weapons, it's the math. What $10 to $12 billion per ship actually means. When most people hear warship, they picture a grey hull, some radar, maybe a helicopter on the back. But at the top of naval power, a warship isn't a vehicle, it's a moving city. And the reason the numbers get so absurd is simple. Once you build something that can carry aviation, command a battle space, defend itself, move at speed and stay out at sea for months, you're not paying for steel, you're paying for systems, you're paying for logistics, you're paying for time, and the Ford-class carrier is the perfect example because it shows you what modern peak warship looks like and what it costs. Chapter 1. The Ford class, a floating city with nuclear hearts. Let's start with scale. The USS Gerald R. Ford is 1,106 feet long. It displaces around 100,000 long tons at full load, and it's powered by 2 nuclear reactors, driving 4 shafts, pushing it to 30+ knots. This is not big. This is geography. If you stood at one end and looked toward the other, you wouldn't see a ship. You'd see a horizon of steel. And it's not just the hull. It's what that hull has to support. Thousands of people, a floating airbase, fuel, food, maintenance, medical, command and control. The ship alone can carry a total complement in the neighborhood of 4,000 plus when you include the air wing. Think about that for a moment. That's a small town, living, eating, sleeping, working and fighting on a platform that can move faster than most people drive on a highway. Now, here's the part that makes the Ford class feel like a science project with a military budget. It wasn't just built to be another carrier, it was built to be the next generation, and that's where the money really starts to climb. Chapter 2. The next-gen tech that makes it costly and complicated. The Ford class didn't just upgrade the paint and call it a day. It introduced major new systems including EMALS, the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, and AAG, Advanced Arresting Gear. These are the launch and recovery systems that determine how fast you can throw aircraft off the deck and catch them again. In theory, these upgrades help increase the carrier's ability to generate sorties. More launches, more landings, more operations. But here's the reality check. The Congressional Research Service has noted that the reliability and maintainability of EMALS and AAG have continued to affect sortie generation and flight operations, describing it as a major risk area for operational effectiveness and suitability testing. The very systems that make the ship next-gen are also the systems that can slow it down. And this isn't just a Ford problem, it's a new technology in a brutal environment problem. Salt water does not care about your PowerPoint slides. High sea states don't respect your deadlines. Now keep that thought in your mind, because in a second, we're going to apply it to the Golden Fleet battleship plan, and the comparison is going to get uncomfortable. Chapter 3. The price tag, not just the ship, but the entire machine. Let's lock in the headline number first. The USS Gerald R. Ford's final procurement cost, about $13.3 billion. And the follow-on ships in the class have long been under pressure to hit lower targets. In fact, Congress set revised cost caps in law that, depending on what's included and how inflation is handled, land in the roughly $11 to $12 billion range for later ships. So yes, the Ford class is one of the only warship programs where $10 to $12 billion isn't a meme. It's a planning number. But here's what people miss. A carrier doesn't sail alone. A carrier sails with escorts, aircraft, logistics, support, and operating the entire carrier strike group is often discussed in terms of millions per day, with some analysis placing it around $6.5 million per day for a carrier strike group. Let me repeat that number so it really lands. Millions. Per day. That's the kind of spending rate where the ship stops being a ship and becomes a rolling national project. Now, if the Ford class is the benchmark for absurdly expensive but strategically central, so what happens when someone tries to build a completely new battleship program at near-carrier prices? For 20 to 25 ships, that's where this story turns from wow to wait, what? Chapter 4. Enter the Golden Fleet, Trump-class battleships. On December 22, 2025, President Donald Trump announced plans for a new class of battleships, described as larger, faster, and 100 times more powerful, to be part of an expanded Golden Fleet. The first ship was named USS Defiant, and the stated ambition wasn't small. Reuters reported Trump said the program would eventually expand to 20 to 25 vessels. The reporting also notes the plan's messaging, tonnage, firepower, industry across the country. And the Washington Post described the battleship pitch as including guns and missiles at the highest level, along with hypersonic weapons, railguns, and lasers, plus the political symbolism, naming traditions, and controversy around the whole concept. Now here's the number that makes this video's title possible. The Washington Post quoted Mark Cancian of CSIS estimating that if built, these ships could cost $10 billion to $12 billion each. And suddenly, it clicks. This is a battleship being talked about in the same financial air as a supercarrier, which raises one question. If carriers are already the most expensive warships on Earth, why build a battleship that costs like one? And that question leads to the part nobody can dodge. Modern war doesn't reward big. Modern war rewards survive. Chapter 5. Why a $10 to $12 billion battleship is a high-stakes gamble. Let's make one thing clear. Big ships have always been a flex. They're symbols, they're psychological, they're floating flags. But the ocean has changed, because weapons and sensors have changed. One of the most famous examples is the DF-21D, often nicknamed the Carrier Killer, a missile system designed to target ships at sea, with US reports suggesting ranges around 1,450 to 1,550 kilometers. Now, that doesn't mean a carrier or a large ship is automatically obsolete, but it does mean something important. In a world with long-range precision threats, concentrating enormous capability into one hull becomes a strategic trade, a trade between power and risk. And that's the first reason a $10 to $12 billion battleship can feel insane to critics. You're putting an enormous amount of national treasure into a single object, a single schedule, a single shipyard pipeline. And if you build 20 to 25 of them, you're multiplying that risk across decades. But here's the cliffhanger. It gets worse, because the real cost isn't just the money, it's the opportunity cost. Chapter 6. The opportunity cost, what you don't build instead. When a nation decides to pour resources into a megaship, it's not just choosing that ship, it's choosing what it will not buy. And this is where modern naval strategy keeps pushing in the opposite direction. Distributed operations, smaller platforms, more nodes, more resilience. In fact, even on unmanned systems, Congressional Research Service reporting notes that large, unmanned surface vehicles are positioned as key enablers of the Navy's distributed maritime operations concept, highlighting the push toward capacity, flexibility, and reduced risk too. Sailors compared to concentrating everything in a few massive targets. So when critics hear $10 to $12 billion battleship, they don't just hear big ship. They hear, that's destroyers you didn't build. That's submarines you didn't fund. That's unmanned fleets you delayed. That's maintenance backlogs you didn't fix. That's training pipelines you didn't expand. And if the Golden Fleet vision truly aims for 20 to 25 of these battleships, that's not a procurement choice. That's a national, industrial, and budgetary philosophy. Now let's talk about the most brutal lesson of all. History already tried battleships as kings, and it ended. Chapter 7. The Ghost of the Last Battleship. Battleships used to be the crown of the sea. Massive guns, heavy armor, imperial energy. But by the modern era, the US Navy's last battleship in active service, USS Missouri, was decommissioned in 1992. That wasn't a random retirement. It was a sign that naval warfare had moved on. Aircraft carriers, submarines, missiles, and networks became the center of gravity. So when a modern administration proposes a new battleship program, it instantly triggers a cultural reaction. Are we bringing back an icon? or resurrecting an obsolete idea with new tech taped onto it. And to be fair, supporters can argue the modern version isn't a World War II battleship, it's a missile ship, a hypersonic platform, a laser platform, a most lethal surface combatant. But critics see the same old trap. If you build something huge, you also build something hard to replace. And if it slips on schedule, if the tech isn't mature, if the shipyard base can't support it, you don't just lose money, you lose time, years. And on the sea, time is power. The final reframe. What this really tells us about power. Here's what this entire story comes down to. The world's most expensive warship Reality, the Ford-class supercarrier, shows you the limit. Case of modern naval power, 100,000 tons, 1,106 feet, nuclear reactors, a floating airbase, and a price tag that lives in the 10 to 13+ billion dollar universe, depending on what you count and how you count it. And it also shows you something else. Even with decades of experience building carriers, introducing new systems still brings reliability, challenges that can ripple into operations. Now take that and apply it to a brand new politically branded battleship concept with hypersonics, railguns, lasers, nuclear cruise missile talk, and an estimated cost of $10 to $12 billion per ship and a claimed ambition of 20 to 25 ships. That's why critics call it insane. Because the ambition isn't just big. It's a bet that the future of naval dominance is built on a few colossal icons instead of a resilient web of systems. And whether you love the idea or hate it, the underlying question is the same. In the next era of war, does power come from building the biggest ship or from building the hardest fleet to break? So I want to ask you something. If you were in charge of the Navy's next decade, would you rather have a few $10 to $12 billion megaships that dominate headlines, or a more distributed fleet that's harder to target, harder to cripple, and faster to replace? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more videos that break down the most unbelievable machines and lifestyles on Earth, click the next card on your screen.